Hello, everybody. I'm Logan Crawford, and this is the award-winning TV talk show right here on Ebru, Fresh Outlook. We begin today with a look at what some call enhanced interrogation and others call torture. The Senate Intelligence Committee is out with a report on techniques used to try to get prisoners to talk about terror in the days, weeks, months, and years following the 9/11 attacks. Take a look.
There were no easy answers. And whatever your views are on EITs, our nation, and in particular this agency, did a lot of things right during this difficult time to keep this country strong and secure.
The Department of Justice looked into the matter, but decided not to indict any of the CIA agents involved.
The president has confidence in the criminal justice system. He's certainly got confidence in the professionalism of the prosecutors.
Elsewhere, the UN is calling for the accused operatives to be held accountable.
Torture is prohibited. Absolutely. People who do practice it should be brought to trial.
Speaking to the science behind the methods, psychologists who authorize the practices defend it.
To me, it seems completely insensible that slapping KSM is bad, but sending a Hellfire missile into her family's picnic and killing all the children and, killing Granny and killing everyone is okay.
The American Psychological Association has denounced the terror tactics.
They were wrong. They were unethical.
Other world leaders have also called out U.S. governments for the torture tactics.
We are back live on set here at Fresh Outlook. We are joined by the Ebru think tank, Dr. Alain Sanders, political science professor at St. Peter's University, Scott Monje from the Foreign Policy Association. He is also an active blogger, and Dr. Rob Pallitto from Seton Hall University. His focus is constitutional law. Let's begin by taking a look at that stack of papers. Scott, could you hoist that up for me? This is not the actual report. This is a summary.
This is the executive summary.
The executive summary of the report, which is more than 600 pages.
525.
Okay. I'm going to start with an easy question. I'm going to get to you all on this question, first of all. I guess it's not that easy. Is what the American CIA did, the Central Intelligence Agency did, to members of Al-Qaeda and suspected members of Al-Qaeda torture?
Yes.
Why?
Because it falls into the general historic rubric. We have, as a nation, tried people for doing the very same things that we did. We tried Japanese in World War II for doing these things. On occasion, we have tried our own people for doing these things in the past.
Alan, what's your thoughts? Torture?
Yeah, absolutely torture. I mean, my response to your question would be another question. If this isn't torture, what is?
Well, pulling out fingernails is torture, burning people alive is torture, beheading people on camera is torture and murder.
I would say to you, I think that comes pretty close to it. Drowning people to the point where somebody is unconscious, having somebody defecate upon themselves to the point where they lose consciousness and are totally losing their mind. That comes pretty close to torture. I mean, it's unbearable pain, for one thing, number one, what was done to these people, and number two, you're dealing with people who lose consciousness, who are totally become dehumanized. If that isn't torture, I don't know what is.
Rob, what are your thoughts? Torture or not?
Absolutely. I mean, we have a criminal statute in our federal law that defines torture and calls it a criminal offense. Torture is the infliction of severe physical or mental pain on a person when it's intended to produce that pain. So clearly, subjecting someone to waterboarding, for example, which makes them think that they're drowning, it creates severe mental pain, and we know that it leaves lasting mental harm as well. It leaves psychological effects. So that's why we saw the Bush administration in 2002 trying to work an interpretation of this legal definition that would allow them to do these things. But I think everybody knows now that it wasn't a defensible interpretation.
We have to look at it.
Just jumping in on this too, I think historically over the ages, torturers came up with a set of techniques that didn't leave telltale marks. And these are the techniques that some have come to view as the humane methods.
Let's talk about historical perspective, though. These techniques were utilized during a post-9/11 world where 3,000 Americans had died when America's tallest buildings had been toppled, where the Pentagon had been attacked. To stop Another attack like this, many thought, I will go to any means possible to prevent it. Did the end justify the means?
A lot of the people point out the tension and the fear of that period, which is true. But this is the reason that we turn these issues, or we think we turn these issues, over to cool-headed professionals and not people who are going to come back later and say, I'm sorry, I got hysterical. What am I going to do? There's supposed to be people who knew what they were doing. As it turned out, the CIA had no interrogation program. They hadn't had one in decades, and they were making this stuff up on the fly as they went along. The FBI knew how to do this, knew how to get information out of people, but they just somehow decided in the CIA that what they did was for trial evidence and not for intelligence. And they just decided that that was
well, it sounds like, Alan, they're trying to be expeditious here, get the information as quickly as possible.
Well, that's true, but I think the report illustrates quite extensively that they really didn't know what they were doing. They were on the fly, as my panel colleague here has said, and they really didn't know what they were doing. They were desperate. And the last thing you want to do when you're dealing with a major crisis, such as the one you outlined, is to be desperate, to be emotional, to be reacting without a cool-headedness. Because if you don't behave cool-headedly, you get outrages such as this. And the problem is now, of course, that since we now know that the United States engaged in these practices, and since the war against terrorism is as much a war, a military war, as a propaganda war, now that we know that we have done these outrageous things to people, we are in the process of losing the propaganda war, which is so important to winning the war against terrorism. We have to make a distinction between the civilized war, the civilized world, and the barbarian world, and that distinction now has become so gray that we're going to have a difficulty making our case to the world.
Rob, I remember a movie, it was called It Takes a Thief, and it takes a thief to catch a thief. Do we have to be barbaric to catch barbarians?
I don't think so. I mean, one thing I think we're going to talk about in this segment is whether these techniques were in fact effective. Did they give useful information that wasn't obtainable otherwise? Did they prevent specific terror attacks? And the report pretty clearly says no.
The report says no, but others, including John Brennan of the CIA and Dick Cheney, the former vice president of the United States, have basically said this report was full of CRAP. Those were Cheney's words. And Brennan said there isn't necessarily a provable causation, but there's certainly a correlation between enhanced interrogation techniques being used and data being derived and terror strikes being stopped.
Well, it's interesting because if you look at what the difference between the report and what these officials and former officials are saying, the report goes specifically through the terror attacks that were supposedly prevented or thwarted and shows that, in fact, there was not a connection. When Brennan and Cheney have talked about these things, they didn't go into any specifics. They simply said, oh, yes, of course it helped us to get useful information to prevent possible attacks. So it's very difficult to argue with someone when they say, oh, yes, it did, but don't provide specifics. The report does provide specifics. I would also suggest that at one point in his press conference, CIA Director Brennan said, it's really unknowable whether we got actionable intelligence that led to prevention of attacks.
I think you're saying it's unknowable whether it was a correlation or a causation. Because I listened to that part very, very closely. He wasn't very fine
all that he
point.
says is that the interrogation program introduced evidence. And I wouldn't dispute that. Interrogation introduces evidence, but there are different people and different methods were used at different times. And at some points they have said, some of them have said, people who had undergone enhanced techniques provided information without claiming that the enhanced techniques produced the information. Brennan is more straightforward, I think, in admitting that we don't really know if that's what it was. And other people like Ali Soufan, who is an Arabic interrogator with the FBI, says that not only do you not need to do it, but it is actually more effective to use other methods that I believe were actually developed by the Army in World War II interrogating POWs. And that he talked to Abu Zubaydah and got as much information out of him as the CIA did before the CIA took him. And it was actually after the CIA took him that he shut up and wouldn't talk anymore. And I heard one claim once that I haven't been able to substantiate, that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed said everything he told the CIA in published interviews in Pakistan before he was captured. These people are not actually hard
Right, but
to
the
get
thing is, they're
information
also
out of. They
going
boast
to-
about it.
They're also going to say that they only gave garbage information publicly, of course. Again, I wanted to our audience, I'm taking the devil's advocate approach here because we have three people on our panel who all believe that what is contained in that report constitutes torture. So I'm going to take the other side of it, saying that perhaps America is harmed by the release of a report such as this. Alan, what are your thoughts on
No,
that?
I don't think so. I mean, we're going to hear, and we have heard, a lot of critics in the world decrying the United States and the tactics that it used, and of course that's correct, and it should be decried and criticized. But we also have to take stock of the fact that we have a Senate report here which is based on our checks and balances in our system that comes out and tells the world what we have done. How many other countries have such a process that tells the world the atrocities that their own governments have created? So I think there's both good and bad here. We have to criticize, we have to pursue, and we have to correct the bad, but we also have to be conscious of the fact that we have a wonderful system in which we have a Senate as one of the institutions that poses a check and balance to the executive, and that has come out with this 7. This is great
Right,
news for those who care about morality.
In our highly partisan world in Washington, there are many people who are going to say that's just a political hack job to beat up Bush and Cheney again and beat up the Republicans. Rob, do you agree with that criticism at all, or?
Well, no, I mean, it's not surprising that claim would be made, but I mean, the Senate makes committees to study all sorts of things, and as Alan says, this is part of accountability. Once we start saying that the report should be limited and we shouldn't look into certain things, I think that's a sort of a fundamental problem with the way our system works. I would also say that
Although you can investigate them, make changes, but just not release the reports publicly.
But why
Certainly
would-
a lot in this government right now is done behind closed
Why
doors.
won't you release it publicly? I mean, the fact that this program was kept totally secret, the fact that the CIA fought release of this report tooth and nail, the fact that it was kept secret should suggest that the people who ran this program thought that there was something wrong with it. Why else would you keep it secret?
Well, maybe in hindsight, again, they thought something was wrong with it.
But they were
during the
keeping it secret
time.
at the time.
Yeah.
They even kept it secret in its details from the President of the United States, according to the
I
report.
also I heard an argument recently that it should have been kept secret, but we can continue the debate anyhow. And the person making this argument then went on to argue on the basis of assertions that are refuted by the report.
Tell me a little bit what's in that report. You came today with these 600 pages. What do you find most disturbing in this report?
Well, actually, what I wanted to talk about when I came, and I'm going to bust in instead of
Okay.
answering your question, is that people think there is a moral dilemma that we're facing here. That torture they will accept is morally repugnant, but they believe that it's effective and fast, and that there are certain times when the need for a fast, effective response outweighs the moral repugnance, and perhaps even times when it's immoral not to get the fast response. And that falls apart, I think, in 3 different areas. It is, according to Ali Soufan and other professional interrogators, not faster and more effective. That these people are not necessarily difficult to get information out of. Everybody just assumes they're hard as nails and don't talk, but in fact, some of them talk quite freely. And the other one just, the situation that people generally talk about, the ticking time bomb, never really happens.
I'm going to stop you there because I want to turn to Rob quickly. Where do we go from here? Now that this report is released, American interrogation techniques that some call torture are exposed. How do we build a better CIA? How do we move forward?
Well, that's what I wanted to get to when you asked about the report being sort of politically motivated or whatever. I mean, the problem is that the real importance of this report, I think, is not knowing what we did, because those of us who've been following this information for a decade know what we did. There's very little in the report that talks about new interrogation techniques. There are a few things that I didn't know, but for the most part, what we did was not a surprise to me. What I think is most significant is who was told what, who obstructed investigations, who lied to whom, how much good faith versus bad faith was employed by intelligence operatives. And so those are the things that can, I think, lead to reform. They can lead to bureaucratic reform at the CIA. They can lead to people really understanding, as Scott says, that there is a false dilemma. When we wring our hands and say, well, there's going to be some time that we just have to use torture. Well, we're really not there yet. What we have is we have psychologists who didn't know what they were doing, developing developing these programs and then getting paid millions of dollars for that. We have the CIA waiting to treat people so that the interrogation could finish. We have the fact that the CIA knew that many of these methods were not effective and yet continued to use them. One really specific example.
Rob, I'm going to hold you there because we have got a break to go to, and we're going to get to your point in just a minute. Scott Monje, a blogger on foreign affairs, thanks so much for joining us. Our conversation continues when we return. Punishing prisoners. Our conversation continues on this Senate Committee report, focusing on what we're doing wrong, what we're doing right in America's system of incarceration. After this.